Call Don now, 682-1270. News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML. Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back. It's 8:08, and we're going to go right back to the phones. And welcome back, Paul Lopez from the law firm of Tripp Scott, and you're also chair of that firm's litigation department. You're kind of our go-to guy now for all things kind of consumer economics related. Good morning.
Good to hear, and good to be back with you. Good morning.
It's a pleasure, and we're going to talk a little bit about a big news story. It broke a couple weeks ago. I think the last week of June this broke, but the Office of Personnel Management had a huge hack, and basically, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but basically anyone that has gone through a federal government background check for a job in the past 10 or 15 years had their information stolen. Is that a correct categorization of this hack?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. It looks like about 22 million individuals' personal information that would have been contained on their applications was stolen and hacked by some folks over what they believe is from China. And the information that was taken includes Social Security numbers, dates of birth, other confidential information that these hackers can use potentially to really engage in some identity theft or other types of nefarious conduct, which we're seeing is being used and implemented now more and more by these cyber attackers, and just a real disaster really for the government, because clearly the head of that agency, who obviously had to resign afterwards, shortly after this whole story broke, this agency was really not taking any proactive measures to secure all of this type of sensitive information. And this is what we're seeing in corporate America with the companies that are being hacked that aren't taking cybersecurity seriously, and now we see the federal government has been attacked by one of our adversaries, if you will, China.
Well, this just kind of underscores that this isn't just a problem that individuals have. For example, I'll just give you a personal example. Somehow, one of my debit cards had the number stolen, probably from a skimmer at an ATM machine or a gas station or somewhere, one of those skimmer things. But it's not. This is not just the kind of thing that happens on a personal scale. 21 million people at one time. I mean, that's a lot of information, and it could do a lot of damage.
Well, that's exactly right, and I think what we're seeing now is that cyber attacks and cybersecurity and the theft of people's identity has become not to overstate this, but it's become seriously a billion-dollar industry. It's a cottage industry overseas, and folks that are taking people's personal information are able to take this information and then sell it in the black market, and the criminals out there can transact for a few days, perhaps a few weeks, buy thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff online or elsewhere before you as an individual become aware of it. So it's not an individual problem anymore. I mean, it still is, and we all have to be mindful of what we do day to day. But when you're dealing with foreign, with governments, with large corporations, we saw in the last few years what happened with Target, with Lowe's, with Walmart. This is a systemic situation. No one is immune from this. Anyone who works on computers, who has a cell phone, who uses that cell phone to transact business, buy stuff online, Amazon, eBay, do their banking, we're all susceptible to it. And it's just a way of life. So, it's scary stuff. And the thing that we're telling our clients, the companies that I represent, is that when you've got information, data on your network, you have an obligation, you have a legal responsibility to take some measures to protect it. And if you're not, guess what? You actually could have exposure. You could be liable if information is stolen from your network and it's shown that you were lax or negligent in how you maintained your cybersecurity.
Well, now on a personal level, what can each of us do? I mean, obviously, there's not a whole lot we can do to stop the Office of Personnel Management from
Right.
from getting hacked, and we have to give out personal information when we apply for jobs. Or actually, do you think that's going to change? Where maybe if you apply for a job, they don't ask for everything up front. Maybe they just ask for your phone number and maybe where you worked and your college degree or something like that. But maybe somewhere down the road, we don't give out our social security number and birth date right away when we apply for a job.
You bring up a good point because, it's been just such a matter of fact in our daily lives that we share our Social Security numbers and our dates of birth. And I can tell you just in my law practice, in my legal practice, that one of the things that we're now counseling clients when they're being deposed, for example, that we're not going to be voluntarily giving someone on the record in a deposition our client's dates of birth and Social Security numbers because of identity theft. But to go back to the first part of your question, what can people do day to day? I mean, look, one of the basic things that we tell folks to do is, hey, use those passwords and put some thought into the passwords. Sometimes, and I think the studies still show that 70 to 80% of people, frankly, don't put any thought to their passwords. They come up with the ABC123 password thinking no one's interested in their stuff, no one's interested in their finances. Well, guess what? You have to assume that people are interested in your financial information. So update your passwords. One of the other things that people can do, every day, most of us who are on the computer working and have our emails up, every day you will get some sort of a nondescript phishing email, an email from somebody that's suggesting to you, someone who's not known to you, by the way, but someone who's saying, hey, click here for a special discount or for a one-time only price reduction, something that is time sensitive and you have to click on it. So what they're hoping you'll do, these cyber attackers, is you'll click on it, and once you click on that email, if it's one of those phishing emails from one of these criminals, they now have the ability to penetrate your network. So our advice is do not click on any emails that come from some unknown source. It's just too easy to do that. So those phishing emails is part of our day-to-day life. Another thing they can do, Don, financial information is so sensitive. Our checking accounts, our bank accounts, our investment accounts. One of the things that we're from a practical standpoint, maybe just use one computer that isn't online to safeguard that information. In other words, your passwords and your financial information and your investment portfolios, use one computer that you only use for that. In other words, you don't use it to go on Amazon. You don't use it to shop online at Macy's. You don't use it to do eBay. You just use it for your financial stuff, and you can buy some software that encrypts the data that's contained on that computer. So now what you're doing is, as an individual, you're segregating your financial information from the rest of your online activities. And we think that that's really something that is important and a powerful tool to at least, again, try to come up with some buffers and some shields to protect your information.
Well, and I will say with the phishing emails, the one I see all the time is fake PayPal or fake credit card bank logins. And if you ever get an email from PayPal or your credit card company, make sure that when you look at the address up at the top that it's the right address, that it's PayPal and not some weird thing that ends with a two-letter instead of a .com. It has some two-letter abbreviation at the end that obviously isn't the real deal. It seems like the more little steps you put in the way, the better chance you have of preventing these kind of things.
That's exactly right. One of the other things that we're seeing, and this is another example of just a little thing you can do in your day-to-day life. We all have access to social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these types of things that everybody uses now. What you want to do is probably keep your personal information to a minimum on those social media sites, and there's also security settings for all of those sites that makes it very clear that unless someone that you know is actually your friend, someone you want to connect with on that site, your information, you can maintain that it's private. And too many people, again, I think the studies show, again, that probably 80 and 90% of the people that are on Facebook or Instagram or these social media sites are not going into the settings and securing their information so that it's not available to general public view. And that's, again, a little step you can take to just safeguard your tidbits of personal information, because those criminals that are out there, that they're trolling, this is their job. They literally spend, 12, 14-hour, 16-hour days looking online, trying to find people's personal information. And where do you think they go? They go to Facebook, they go to Instagram, they go to Twitter, and they start trying to see if someone who's out there has a lot of information, and then they probably start drilling down a little further. It's some of this is common sense, Don. Some of it is being smart. Again, passwords, not clicking on emails from unknown sources. And by the way, when we're talking about Social Security numbers, for example, if a company sends you, that you're doing business with, sends you an email asking for your personal information, for example, a credit card application online, well, it might be better, as opposed to responding to an email from an outside source, go to that company's actual website and talk to a customer service representative on the phone versus doing it online. Again, just a little bit of preventative maintenance here of what you're doing day to day could really be a pound of security for you. Because again, people are just very, very loose with this information. And the one thing we're telling our clients, companies that safeguard this information, whether it's a physicians group or financial planners who have people's investment portfolio information on their networks, you've really got to just take all of these little steps in the aggregate to come up with a good security system for this information. Because one of the things that's happening is companies are now getting sued, for being negligent when it comes to safeguarding data, and that's something that we're seeing now, and we're recommending to our clients and advising them, hey, you could actually have exposure here. And by the way, the other issue that now is springing from all of this, that we're talking about, cyber attacks and cybersecurity, is there's something called cyber insurance. That actually insurance brokers now are working with companies to come up with cyber insurance in case your system is hacked and information is taken, and then there's financial harm to your customer or to your vendor or to your company as a result of it. So you got to kind of start arming yourself with professionals to deal with this stuff, whether it's your lawyer to come up with a good policy to protect against liability, your insurance broker for the cyber insurance, IT personnel to come up with the appropriate firewalls and the encryption of this information. You've got to start really taking this, to put it up on the priority list of importance, because too many people are still not really, not really paying attention to this.
Well, now, say you're in a situation where maybe you did apply for a federal government job a couple years ago. You didn't get the job for whatever reason. You know pretty much that your information is among these 21.5 million people that have had theirs stolen. What's the first thing that you do?
Well, one of the things that you do is you call the Office of Personnel and Management because they've set up actually a hotline to deal with this, and they are actually providing, or at least it's being kicked around now in Congress, that they're going to be providing to individuals who have had their information compromised identity theft insurance. So what I would recommend is, if you've applied with the federal government and you didn't get the job, but your information may have been compromised, call the Office of Personnel Management, and they're apparently keeping a log of the names of the individuals whose information was taken. So that's the first thing they can do.
Okay. Now, so you get that, you get the identity theft insurance, and hopefully nothing bad comes out of this for most of the people. What can Congress do? I mean, the Office of Personnel Management. I mean, the head of the office left as a result of this hack. I mean, is there anything that Congress can do to kind of put the pressure on them to maybe be a little bit more secure?
Well, I think what you're seeing and what we're all reading about is that Congress is definitely calling to task not only the Office of Personnel Management, but the other federal agencies that have sensitive information on their networks, and making sure that the heads of those agencies understand that they're going to be held accountable if there's a breach. Now, what that means is that these heads of agencies, just like any head of any organization, whether it's a private company or federal government, what they've got to do is actually start prioritizing as a line item budget cybersecurity issues. This is something that is now has to be factored into your budget, year to year. And, we've talked about, some of the things that you need to do. You have to invest in the appropriate cybersecurity software. You have to hire the right IT personnel, whether it's, in-house or whether you go to an outside vendor who's going to, be an expert and help you and guide you to develop the right firewalls and the right security systems. And here's the other thing, Don. The employees of these agencies, just like the employees of any company, have to start being educated by the government about things to do when they're on the computer. We talked about the phishing emails, and, people are at their computers all day long. They get a pop-up of an email from an undisclosed source. They don't know who the source is. And the first thing they do is they click on the email, just as a knee-jerk response. Well, one of the things we're telling our clients to do is educate your employees about not doing that and develop policies in the workplace that your employees are required to follow, and there are just good protocols with respect to what to do and what not to do on their computers day to day. So I think what we're seeing is, unfortunately, it's reactionary. We've got a bunch of firemen out there trying to put fires out instead of being proactive. But I think what Congress is doing is the message is very clear. If your agency hasn't prioritized cybersecurity and this information or the information in your agency is hacked into and you were asleep at the wheel, well, you know what? Heads are going to roll. People are going to lose their jobs. And I think the message is very clear. If you don't prioritize cybersecurity and try to insulate your networks from these types of attacks, your job's on the line. Now, I will say also, I think Congress is looking at amending some of the current laws that are in place that somewhat deal with cybersecurity. There's a couple of federal statutes out there that, such as, for example, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the Stored Communications Act. These are laws that were implemented in the last several years, not necessarily for cyber attacks, but they were really dealing with, for example, people that had no authorization to be on your computer who stole your stuff. Kind of in my practice, many times we go after employees, people that have stolen information from my clients, trade secrets, confidential proprietary information, and then we go after them in federal court to get an injunction against them. And those laws can be used for those types of acts. But I think what Congress is now focusing on is taking some of these existing laws, like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and perhaps adding some amendments to the act that deal more specifically with cyber attacks, and perhaps creating more criminal penalties in place. Because, look, there are criminal penalties in place for someone who, dives into your computer and steals your stuff. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is a very powerful law that sets forth that there are criminal repercussions to someone who does that. But I think Congress is now, changing the paradigm a little bit and having to change its paradigm a little bit to focus on, okay, what do we do when we're dealing with cyber attacks coming in from the outside? Again, whether it's a rogue employee or a rogue nation, what are some of the things that we can use in the laws to create more teeth, put more teeth in it, so that people are understand that there's some serious consequences if you're trolling and you're trying to snoop into someone's network and hacking into that one network. I think that's one of the things that Congress is talking about right now.
Well, and I imagine there's probably a good bit of international diplomacy that needs to be done with this as well, because, again, a lot of these attacks are coming from other countries. We can have all the laws on our books as we want, but if there are big boiler rooms full of Chinese hackers doing all the hacking, we're going to eventually have to deal with China in some way.
Yeah, that's also true. I mean, look, you hit the nail on the head. These laws are wonderful and great if you're dealing with folks here in this country. But if you're dealing with a China or South Korea or Australia, now you're talking about international diplomacy, and now you have to deal with it at that level. And the reality is that I know that one of the things that was discussed when there was an attack, for example, the Sony attack from last year, it was contended that attack came from North Korea. Now, I'm not sure if it ended up that was in fact the culprit, but I know that initially it was believed that it was a North Korea attack, and there was discussions back then that one of the things that was going to happen was, okay, we certainly can't prosecute someone from North Korea under our criminal laws, but there could be obviously some more sanctions on a diplomatic level with a government that perhaps is coddling or suborning this type of behavior. So I think what we'll see in the future is when you do have these types of foreign situations where you have a cyber attack from China or from the North Korea or some other country, the United States may very well retaliate through some other means, economic sanctions, some of the things that we see happen in international diplomacy, trade restrictions, embargoes, those types of remedies are certainly at the disposal of the U.S. government, and I think everything's fair game in this new world that we live in with cyber attacks coming from overseas.
Now, do you think that this is going to end up being a situation where people start going back to more old-fashioned? I mean, you mentioned, maybe instead of applying for credit cards online, you call the 800 number. Do you think people are going to start going back to more old-fashioned ways, or are we so far down the hole right now that we best just concentrate on securing things online and securing our IT systems instead of depending on old-fashioned technology?
Well, it's a really good question, and I think some of this clearly is unknown to many of us. Whether we get back to kind of a reboot, if you will, where we start doing things on a more basic level, I kind of think that's hard to envision because we've just gone down this technology hole so far that I think what we're going to be seeing is simply more proactive ways to secure information or to take information and then store it somewhere. Maybe what we're going to see is that for a job application that's being done online, more companies are going to be using encrypted sites that are going to store that type of information. I can tell you just in some of the things that we see day to day, CPA firms, for example, many times now when they're doing their tax returns with their clients, they're using an encrypted site to transmit information back and forth with their clients. So that's an example where the technology is there, Don, that can secure the information or at least give us more security. You just have to actually spend the money and spend the time to implement it. So I'm not sure that we'll go back to, kind of more, to use your term, the more old-fashioned way of doing business. I think what's going to happen is we have to just be smarter about how we're sharing this information. And, the repositories, if you will, for this information are going to have to start being smart about segmenting it, fragmenting it, putting it into a particular silo that's encrypted versus storing it in one general, virtual warehouse that then becomes, susceptible to attack, and then it becomes a major attack because all that information is located in one particular area of a network, and it can just be siphoned off that easily. So I think we might see a little just being smarter and using the technologies that are out there on a more proactive basis.
Well, you only have a couple minutes left, but would you say it's fair that I think this is going to be an ongoing battle? I mean, we're probably at the very infancy of this cybersecurity battle. I foresee this going on for as long as we have as long as we have everything electronic, there's always going to be someone trying to do something bad. So this is a battle that'll never end.
Let me give you an example, Don, to answer your question. I think 4 or 5 years ago, the estimates were that cyber attacks and these issues that we're talking about, from an economic standpoint, were predicted as costing maybe $500 million, $500 to $600 million. Now, today, this cyber security issue and cyber attacks is a multi-billion dollar, that's with a B, problem. So to answer your question, not only is it here to stay, I think you're absolutely right. We're in the infant stages of this, and it's going to be a problem that we will continue to deal with every day. We all use our cell phones to do personal business on. We use our computers every day. Cyber security and cyber attacks is here to stay, and these folks that are doing these types of hacks, I mean, these are kids that are geniuses. They're brilliant, and there's a lot of money at stake. This identity theft, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry out there in foreign countries, and what we have to all understand is this. It's here. It's going to continue to be in our everyday life. And unless you're going to go off the grid and not use a computer and not use a cell phone, you need to be thinking about it.
And I think probably the other moral of the story is if you have young kids, tell them to get into cybersecurity as a career.
I think there's going to be a lot of career opportunities in cybersecurity, no doubt about it.
Hey, if I were 25 years younger, I might consider that. Paul Lopez, again, thank you. You want to let everybody know where they can find you?
Sure. If they have any other questions, they can always certainly email me at my email address, pol@tripscott.com. And if they want to know a little bit more about our practices and our law firm, they can go to our website at tripscott.com. And we'll be happy to give you any further information to help your listeners out.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very informative. I try to keep up on this stuff, and I even learned a few things with this conversation. So thank you very much.
Anytime, Don. We're always happy to help.
Thanks a lot. There you go, Paul Lopez from the Florida law firm of Tripp Scott. I mean, this is important stuff. I mean, this identity theft threat is real, and as Paul mentioned, if you have applied for a federal job in the past 10 years or so, I would probably give a call to the Office of Personnel Management. Make sure your information hasn't been stolen. If it has, they'll help you out with some identity theft insurance, which isn't a bad idea for the rest of us either, even if you have to pay for it. It's not a bad idea because it does happen. News Talk 1270, KIML.
Basin Radio News, Fox News, Cowboy State News.
More news than you can shake a stick at.
Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270, KIML. 1270, KIML. 1270, KIML. 1270, KIML.